So hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so excited today that we have James Rosenblatt with us, and he owns a very prestigious law firm here in San Antonio, and we're going to quiz him on some questions. Everybody always has questions about law and other avenues of law, so today you're going to get to find out some of those questions.
Great.
So, James, tell us a little bit about why you decided to get in law, when you opened your firm, and so forth.
Sure. Well, I'll start off with it. This is actually our 20th year for our firm.
Whoop,
So
whoop.
thank you. Very exciting. I've been practicing law over 30 years, did a number of different things here in San Antonio, working for a couple smaller, one small law firm, one national law firm, and one in-house general counsel for a construction company. So I've seen it from all angles. Started the firm 20 years ago. And at this point we have 20 lawyers, almost 20 lawyers, and we are in San Antonio, Houston, and Austin.
Yes, and you just expanded to Houston, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. We're very excited. It's a real opportunity.
So what made you decide to get into law?
You know, I am one of those people that went to college knowing I was going to get a degree in economics. I wanted to work with business owners, and I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to put it to work, but I knew that's where I was going. And my junior year of college, I decided to make a decision between whether I was going to go get a PhD in economics or if I was going to go to law school. And after taking a graduate course in economics, I decided that going to law school was going to be more fun. And so I went to law school knowing I wanted to work with businesses and help owners deal with their legal issues.
And I would have to say a doctorate or any of those things in economics versus law is a lot more entertaining.
You know, it's a lot more rewarding. The economy goes up and down. I'm not excited about whether I guessed right or not, but I love when business owners come to me. We help them start their business. We help them operate it. And hopefully, if they want an exit, we help them make that exit and make them realize that their life work has been worth something.
And so I know you said that you wanted to work with people and their businesses. Tell us a little bit about what your law practice covers in areas of law and so forth.
So, and I need to differentiate a little bit. I work with business owners. Our firm actually does a lot of estate planning. We do litigation work, but I get to work with business owners from everything from developing property, acquiring real estate, dealing with contracts, mergers and acquisitions, selling off their businesses or buying other businesses, and other issues that a business owner would have to deal with in running and operating their business.
And I always find that fascinating and also extremely important because a lot of times people try and go about these things without good guidance and counsel and end up seeing you anyway, wishing they would have started there to begin with. So tell us about some of the important things a business owner needs to think about and when they might want to call you in reference to that on the front side instead of on the back side.
Like with so many things in life, it is so much cheaper to get prepared and do it right the first time than have to fight about it later. And so, look, law firms, most lawyers charge by the hour. Our hourly rates do seem expensive, but yet in comparison to litigation, in comparison to loss of your investment, compared to losing a real estate deal or losing your investment in a real estate deal, we're cheap. And so understanding that spending a little bit of money up front will save you so much money in the long run by just doing it right the first time.
And I can speak to that personally because I know that I've used your law firm in my own business. I needed a vendor program written for a document for people to sign on that spelled out our commitments to each other. That is not something I would ever want to draft myself or dabble in because just for the reason you said, I would not want to end up in court. And that was just one of the things. We've often come to you to get various things written that we need so it is done right. And I know when somebody signs on it, if they have a problem with it, an attorney's already reviewed it versus getting that notice that I'm going to be in the courtroom because they didn't like what they signed.
Absolutely. I mean, again, everything from people who just decide to use Google law to AI law. Look, every tool has a use, but unless you understand what you're getting out of it, you can just create more problems for yourself. I can't tell how many times I look at a document, I'm like, oh, you got this off Google. And they're like, well, how do you know? Well, it calls for Wisconsin law to apply. Probably not something we're going to do here in Texas. Not a lot of Wisconsin licensed attorneys here in Texas.
Yes, and I'm sure AI considered itself a very good attorney, which many people don't understand. It's not. It pulls from all over, and it doesn't apply state by state.
It also makes stuff up.
Yes, it does. I've heard about that and have experienced it ourselves. I'm sure that's caused a great lot of laughter on you guys' side to see what people come up with or present to you.
Sometimes they'll come to me, they're like, hey, this is a perfect document. I just want you to look at it. And then you start asking questions. You're like, well, I don't know why that's in there. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And, again, you've got to start with quality. You really need to start with what the facts are in your situation in order to make sure you're applying the correct document and putting the right legalese in there. It's not just boilerplate. It's important. And in the end, that's how a case may or may not be decided. And so you want to make sure you put your right foot forward.
So, I think that comes to a very good question. Lots of people have a lot of misconceptions about calling an attorney. Can you talk to us about some of those misconceptions?
Well, look, let's talk about the area of real estate, right? I mean, as a real estate broker, you cannot practice law. There are great documents that have been given to you by the real estate counsel that says you can use these documents. And for a real estate deal that falls in those documents, great. But there are times when they don't apply, or you need something else to go with it. And that's where a quality real estate broker like yourself will know to say, hey, we need to get a lawyer involved. When the agent or the broker tries to change those documents by themselves, they're on a very careful line because they could be practicing law. On the other side, they may be putting words in there that they think have a meaning that they may not have in the law. Law is very specific. And so sometimes words in ordinary course we think have one meaning in the law may have a completely different meaning. And that may not have been what was intended. But a court is going to look at it based on what they know and what the case law says.
And I've found that very true because I've watched words like will and shall be changed around, and they have very different impacts that we as a layperson have no clue about.
Yeah, absolutely. You may think they're interchangeable, and they're not. I mean, the good news, bad news about being a lawyer is you're always looking back and trying to figure out what was intended when, quite frankly, the parties may not remember 3 or 5 years ago what they were intending. And so we're putting words in someone's mouth based on what they've written on the piece of paper. And we as lawyers may spend more time parsing every one of those words than they did drafting it. But that's our job. And so we are very careful with our words.
And so what are some important things when you go to select attorney that you think it's important for people to know versus just, opening up Google and go, this one looks good?
Like anything else, when you hire a professional, it needs to be someone you trust. If you don't like what they have to tell you, if you're not going to take their advice, you're spending a lot of money for nothing. So it should be someone you can relate to, that when you pick up the phone and call them and they tell you this is what I think you need to do, you're going to take their advice. But otherwise, you need someone who knows what you're talking about, that has experience. That's not someone who says, hey, let me go do a quick bit of research about a very easy question, but they may need to do more detail later on. But again, it's someone who has some gray hair, who knows what they're talking about, and yet also knows when to say, that's a really good question, Missy. I'm going to have to go look at some stuff and I'll call you back.
So, and I often find people think that attorneys just cover everything. Can you speak to us a little bit about why it's important to find someone that's actually what you just talked about, knowledgeable in that subject? Because sometimes I have found people, especially like when it comes to real estate, I have a relative that's a family practice attorney, and I'm thinking, this is not going to be good. Can you address that?
Absolutely. Look, there are, just like you wouldn't go to a dermatologist for a heart condition, you shouldn't be going to a family lawyer for a real estate issue. I can't tell you how many times that family lawyers, criminal lawyers, other types of specialists will hire our firm to help them with their real estate issues or their business issues, because that's not the kind of law you practice. I'm not going to help you if you've got a criminal issue. My wife, who's spent 6 years as a prosecutor, I'm happy to refer them over to her, but I'm not going to answer those questions. And so again, just like any other profession where there's a specialist, you want someone who knows what you're talking about, who doesn't have to go learn it for the first time or is trying to remember back 30 years to when they were in law school.
And let's say you pick up the phone and you call who you think is a great attorney to be able to work with. Are there some really good questions you can ask them to make sure that you're going to be aligned or that they can actually fit your needs. And let's just, because we're on the topic of real estate, let's just use real estate for a moment because it's an easy thing to address. I have a problem with a contract and I need to find a real estate attorney. What are some good questions I might want to ask that attorney to know that they are qualified in what I need? Especially, give an example, residential versus commercial, very different.
Very different. So look, it's a really good question. Our office and most lawyers will provide a 30-minute free consultation. And that consultation really is not to discuss the facts of your case, but to get to know each other and decide whether you can work together. So the first thing you need to do is this a person that I'm going to trust? Do they talk to me? Do they talk down to me? Do they talk in big words that they don't understand and I don't understand? Are they explaining things in ways that make sense to me? Have they done this work before? Can they talk about other cases they've had? What do they consider a successful outcome? A real estate litigator is going to see every dispute as a litigation opportunity. That may be what you need, or maybe, no, I just need to get it resolved. I don't want to go spend that kind of money to litigate, because unfortunately, litigation is very expensive. If you have a dispute that's $1 million, litigation may be appropriate. If you have a dispute that's $10,000, there's no time litigation is going to make sense. And so you also want to make sure you're talking to a lawyer that sees various ways to handle a situation and can lay out some strategy there. They can say, hey, look, let's try this first, and let's try that, let's try this. If that doesn't work, we'll go here. And that way you know kind of what we're talking about and some of the costs. Look, I can never tell you as you walk in, this is what a matter is going to cost, but I should be able to say, look, for me to review a contract is going to be X. For me to send a letter is going to be Y. And so you have some understanding of where we're going and where the decision points are.
I think those are amazing key points. And many people don't know to ask questions. They just call and say, I have a problem. And so those are important for people to actually take notes on and write down and remember when they call somebody, because the more questions you ask, then the better relationship you will have. And you'll find out real quick if it's the right person for you or not.
Absolutely. And look, you already are professional enough. You're an expert enough. You're already asking questions. But if you called my office and said, I've got a problem, I'm going to ask those same questions. Okay, it's a real estate issue, commercial or residential. Are you the landlord or the tenant? And again, we're going to figure out very quickly which box you fit in order to make sure I give you good advice. There is no general real estate advice that applies in every situation. It's all going to be very fact specific.
Correct. So James, is there a story you could share with us that brings home some points that we've talked about?
Over 30 years, there's hundreds of them, but
I bet.
let me try one on you. And this isn't a particular story, quite frankly, it's a group of stories, but a lot of times people think they can be their own developer. And so they will buy a tract of land thinking, oh, great, I can divide it up. I'll make it into condos, apartments, office buildings, and sell them off and make lots of money. And look, if you buy the right piece of real estate, you can. But you'd be amazed how many times they don't realize platting, zoning, correct design, making sure you have a piece of property that will work the way you want it to. And so inevitably we get brought in when they've got a citation, they've been sued, there's a problem raised, and now we're trying to undo what they've done. And so, it's always good to be able to rely on yourself, but you also need to know when to have experts behind you. And so, especially in real estate, if something is cheap, there's probably a reason for it. And if you can't figure out what it is, it's probably something that's going to bite you. And so I can't tell you how many times people come to me, they're like, I'm already about to get my certificate of occupancy and sell these things off or move in, but now I've got this issue. Can you fix it? We can fix a lot of stuff, but the problem is by the time we're fixing it, it may be very expensive. And so again, it kind of goes back to that rule. Look, if you have a lawyer that's been involved in the process, you don't have to spend millions of dollars with them to get something done, but simply being able to go to them and say, hey, can you check this? Can you look at that? Title commitments, perfect example. People assume that if they get a title commitment, the title company's already approved everything. They can throw it in a drawer, or most of the time they throw it away and don't look at it. And so we're coming back later and saying, hey, you see where it says there's that easement right there in the middle of where you want to put your driveway, and you have to give them the right to dig that up? That's going to be a problem. Or you're putting a building there. or a fence is going. I mean, again, there's so many different variations on a theme. Those title commitments are very important. Again, in commercial, we deal with challenging them all the time. I mean, I've never seen a commercial piece of any quality close where some lawyer hasn't gone back and said, hey, I want to fix this. I want to fix that. In residential, it's rarer. And I've had a couple of times where the real estate broker that only does residential will say, what are you doing? Why are you asking these questions? But the insurance you buy from a title company is only as good as that commitment. And so if that commitment says, you can't use this property for X, Y, and Z, you don't have a claim against the insurance company when you can't use it for X, Y, and Z.
That is so true. I read our title commitments, and I've noticed title commitments have gone to these active little links that no one clicks on and dives in deeper. And most real estate brokers and agents do not understand they can challenge a title commitment. And you're so right. It's only as good as the paper is written. And so it's very important to read those and understand, especially when you get in larger tracts of land, because there are lots of easements and other things that don't always show up on a survey either.
Absolutely. And look, when you hire a lawyer, not only do we click on those links, we save them.
Yes.
And again, saving them is half the battle sometimes, because if there's an issue about page 5 and it wasn't included in the link, that can be a big deal. But if all you've done is clicked it and looked at it really quickly, you don't know what you've looked at, and you don't know if page 5 was included or not. And title companies are not infallible. They provide a very necessary service, but they're only doing the best they can.
Correct. And their job is to ensure the least that they can as well. And people don't understand that and the importance of reading those.
And again, we could have a whole talk
Yes.
about, things you can add on, right? I mean, a general title policy is only one option. You could add on various endorsements, and some of them are very cheap. They're all promulgated by the state, how much they can charge for them. And some, again, you wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, you as a real estate broker might know, but a developer or someone who's out there buying real estate probably doesn't know about them. And some of them you should absolutely be buying. They're well priced. They mitigate risk, and they leave you in a situation where you're not going to get caught, where otherwise you could.
That's very true. And that also comes back to why it's important to have a professional on your side and why it's important to read what you're going to accept or sign. And we all know people aren't good about that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, again, as I said, law is very fact specific. And so it could be that one piece of paper that was at the bottom of the stack when you'd already signed 4 million other things that becomes the decision on whether you win or lose a case. And it's not the client's job to do that. But if you hire an attorney, it's the attorney's job to do that and come back and say, wait a minute, you realize that there's no access to this property, or there's residential access to this property, but you can't go build a subdivision back there because you don't have the right access point. Again, these are all technicalities, but before you spend a lot of money in your investment, no matter what size it is, you better make sure you know what you're buying.
James, let's switch for a second.
Okay.
Since we're talking about policies here.
Sure.
And we just talked about title policies. Let's switch to insurance policies. We know insurance policies, homeowners insurance and everything else out there is of concern today.
Yes.
Example is all the wildflowers. There we go. I wish we were blooming wildflowers, and we will be, but that's after the wildfires.
Yes.
Out on the West Coast has caused a lot of concern. And, that's another thing that people don't read carefully.
Absolutely.
Is their homeowner's insurance, which also has some very inexpensive addendums you can add on. So tell us a little bit about maybe some of the things you guys have experienced with that, because I'm sure people sue their insurance company as well.
They do, and we've been involved in those. And, again, insurance is a contract. And so like any contract, I always like to say insurance companies are not in the business of paying claims. But that's very important to understand. Insurance is a business. And so an insurance company has agreed by contract for you to pay a certain amount of premium in exchange for a so much transfer of risk. And what risk they will accept is very, very specific. And so it's important to understand what risk you are transferring. Commercial insurance has certainly gotten more expensive.
Yes.
Residential insurance is getting more expensive. They're also limiting what they will cover. And so, for example, if you have a pool, or if you have a jungle gym, or again, that may be excluded from your policy. And so understanding what you're buying for coverage, you're paying so much for it, what deductibles are available, what choices you have to make are very important. Because if you come to me and say, hey, I want to file a dispute on X and X is excluded, I'm going to tell you it's not covered by your policy. And so it's important. Again, no one wants to read insurance policies, but I do it for a living and they're fun. Very few people will tell you that. But again, those words are very important. The insurance company picks those words very carefully. And there's lots of case law about most of the words they've chosen that supports their position. If not, they change the words. And so understanding what's in that policy is very important.
And I know we don't have typically wildfires here. We have some, but nothing like West Coast. What are some things that you perceive may become a problem that you may end up in litigation over in the future dealing with homeowners policies?
So look, I'm old enough that we dealt with it when the hurricanes came through the coast, and we had lots of disputes with insurance companies over what they were going to cover, how much they were going to cover, would they cover, was the damage caused by wind or rain or flood waters, and every one of those had a different meaning. And so, as insurance costs get more expensive because there are more claims out there, insurance companies are cutting back on what coverage they provide. I mean, if you go back 20 years, it was rare to find a 2% deductible policy. I think today it's pretty hard to find a policy that isn't a 2% deductible or higher. And so, again, insurance companies are looking for a way to make money. And so they are going to charge as much as they can for as little and provide as little coverage as they can. That's the business they're in.
Absolutely.
What are some things people can do to help protect themselves better or get the best policy possible?
They need to understand what their risks are and what is important to them. I mean, look, for example, and it's a little far afield from what we've been talking about, my policy is always the second home or any other real estate goes in its separate LLC. Why? Because that gives you a different level of protection, having it separate from the rest of your assets. Similarly, knowing what the policy excludes. If you have a lake house and you have a boat, is the boat covered by your homeowner's insurance? Probably not. But knowing that it's not and knowing that you need to go get separate coverage and how to handle that. What about the dock? What about guests? There's so many different things that you need to consider. And every house is different, obviously, and every risk is different. If you're leasing it out for an Airbnb, that's a commercial use of a property. A residential property insurance policy is not likely going to cover the fact that you're renting that out every week. And so how many times do people say, well, commercial policies are too expensive, so I'm going to get a residential policy? Great. Guess what? You're not covered probably for anything. And so that can be a real problem.
I think that's very true because I'm going to lay money that probably 85%, I'm just going to pull a number,
Yep.
does not have a commercial policy on that Airbnb. And if something happened, God forbid it burnt down, they have no coverage.
Yeah, the insurance company's going to deny it.
Exactly. And that struck a note in me because we have a lake house. And I have a bungalow that was a project that turned into a larger project that we have thought about, putting up as an Airbnb. And my whole thought process behind it was, okay, we have water, we have a dock, and that's a liability. So I would need to come to you to have a disclaimer or a disclosure of some sort, a release of liability.
Correct.
For someone to sign off on at their own risk that if you fall in the water, you can't sue me.
Correct.
And it's thinking through those things that people don't take the time until the problem happens and it's too late. So it's really important to no matter what you do, think about what's the legal angle of this.
I tell people I'm not fun at cocktail parties because I'm always kind of thinking the bad things. But look, you talk about that bungalow and you talk about a release. Great. Those are a great first step. But the person renting the bungalow is probably bringing family members or friends or kids with them. They haven't signed the release or legally can't be bound by that release. And so now we have to figure out how to include them to get you protected. And again, that's what a lawyer's mind does is we look at it and say, okay, how many issues can I spot here? That's what law school is all about is literally it's can you find Waldo in a fact situation and coming up with different ways of resolving those issues is what I do for a living.
What are some other business issues that you guys handle that you typically will get a phone call on from a business owner, not just real estate, but I know I had some clients that had used you in the past and they owned a different business. So tell us a little bit about that.
It can be so much. It can be everything from, you know what, James, we just want to sit down with you and talk about our strategy going forward. Or it could be, hey, we've got this business. It's been highly successful. We want to take it to the next level. It may be an employee issue. I see a lot of employee issues right now. The change in regulations have got everyone confused. We had a non-competes were going away. The non-competes aren't going away. I think if you polled 10 business owners, I think half of them would tell you they're not sure if non-competes are enforceable in the country or not. Spoiler alert, they still are. But it's confused everyone. BOI, Corporate Transparency Act, again, I could write a dissertation on whether those are enforceable at the moment. Spoiler alert, they're not. But the on again, off again, you have this obligation, you don't have this obligation, it's going to cost you a fine of $1,000 a day. It's so confusing, just all the different moving pieces. And so a lot of times business owners will call and just say, hey, can you talk to me about this? Having spent a bunch of time as sort of a general counsel for a construction company, I look at it a little differently than a lot of lawyers. I'm not looking at it just with is there a legal issue here? And so I'll talk to business owners all the time about insurance issues or bank issues or just strategy issues. How do you get your business ready if you want to sell it in 5 years? What does that look like? Because I've been doing this long enough, I've got some opinions. I've seen what worked. I can share advice from thousands of people that I've worked with over the years.
And that also rings a little bell in my mind about, if you're going to do succession planning, you never want to do it without an attorney because there's always tentacles to a business, and getting some sage advice on that is pretty important versus just going to a business broker and say, okay, I'm going to sell my business.
Absolutely. And look, a good succession plan is a process. It is not, I wake up this morning and be like, I want to sell my business. Do I see that happen all the time? Yes. But the better ones are deliberate. And unfortunately, I've had too many where, the sole business owner dies and we're trying to sell the business afterwards. And guess what it's worth?
Nothing.
The price of the desk, $30.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't take the time to sort of care and feed for your business and design it in a way where it has value without you being there, it likely won't.
That is very true. What are some good tips you could give a business owner to think about in reference to that?
The best advice I can give someone is take time away from your business, sit down with a professional, whoever you trust. Again, as I said, I sit down with business owners all the time. We sit down with a whiteboard and I say, okay, tell me where your business is today. Tell me where your business needs to be in 5 years. And let's figure out how we're going to get you there. And there may be very little legal about that. There may be a lot of legal about that, right? We may need to protect trademarks. We may need to design their contract differently. We may be looking at different markets or different customer bases. But part of it is simply, okay, who are you missing in your organization? As a 3-person operation, you probably do need a CFO. If you've got 50 people, you probably do need a chief financial officer. Are you still the COO? Are you the CEO and the COO? Or should you be one and not the other? So many times, as I like to say, business owners are in the trenches. They're fighting it out day in, day out. And they sit back and they're like, oh, wow, it's 20 years have disappeared. I don't know what happened. Well, you got to take that time. You got to get out of the trenches. You got to say, okay, what's going on? Where am I going? And how do I either keep it going the right direction or pivot as the market changes?
Very sage advice. Very true. And most of us aren't forward thinking. We're too busy about handling the day. And that's where it really helps to have great advice.
Well, thank you. Look, last year we were involved in 26 deals for about $112 million. That's a lot of transactions. And it was everything from $300,000 restaurant sales up to $40 and $50 million professional businesses, professional services, or construction companies or various things. And so I've seen a lot of success, but we've all, from each one of those, I can tell you something that they could have done better. And I've also seen cases where we can't get them there for a bunch of reasons. I've had cases where we had one that I like to talk about where we took the business off the market. It had too many problems. It wasn't going to get a good price. And we turned around, we pivoted over 2 or 3 years and took it back out and got them $45 million. It just takes that time to say, hey, wait a minute. Are we really doing the right thing? Do we have too many problems here? Is the buyer going to focus on those issues and not the success you've had?
Which comes back to why it's so important to find that trusted professional that you can sit down, have that conversation with, and understand what are the pros, what are the cons, and how do we make it the best. Since you talked about construction, let's talk about construction for a minute. One of my favorite topics.
Oh, You just have to look at our parking lot, which is
I
a
know.
dirt pit at the moment, but and all good things come from it, right?
So tell us some of the things that you see that people always want to sue a builder for.
What don't they want to sue a builder?
I know.
I mean, look, and here is another good point, right? There's a difference between this typical professional commercial builder and the typical residential. And I'm generalizing here, and I'll admit
Yes.
that there are some that do better at one and worse at the other. But look, it all boils down to expectations. And so if you don't have a good contract that is very clear on what you're asking them to deliver and what the price is for that, that's really important. And a lot of times that's where we end up with a dispute. You know, we went through a post-COVID pool. We probably had 10 pool cases. And it was a perfect example of everyone said, hey, I'm going to be stuck at home for the next 2 years. I want a pool. Well, guess what? Not everyone can have a pool quickly if everyone's trying to build a pool. There were a lot of people building pools that had no business building pools. And there was a lot of missed expectations, either timing, cost, or what they were getting, results. And so we ended up with lots of hurt feelings and a lot of unhappy owners because of that. And we also ended up with unhappy construction companies. The prices were increased. I mean, it was a tough time to be in construction, tough time now to be in construction. And so having very clear expectations of what is going to be delivered, when you're going to pay for it, when you're going to receive payment if you're the contractor, understanding the lien process. So few homeowners and certainly builders understand the lien process and what's involved in properly making sure that no liens are filed on the property.
Do you have some details on what you just shared, where you could go into a little bit more detail, saying, you know, like you have to have expectations on what different things are going to be built and by when? Any thoughts or ideas on how to do that or how to keep the builders accountable? Like in my personal experience, I did that and the guy didn't deliver and I really didn't have much I could do. So that, like, it's coming from some personal experience. Still talk to Missy about it.
I'm going to.
But if we can kind of get into some advice on some little bits, I think it could be very useful. I'm just going to clap for editing purposes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's always important. Again, I sort of talked in generalities, but let's talk some specifics. You know, in residential, there's typically some money paid up front. In commercial, there typically is not money up front or very little money up front. So the homeowner then, has control over how work is progressing because they shouldn't pay more money than the work that's been done. But again, it's also an area where most homeowners or most business owners don't know the value of the work that's been put in. And so having an expert who can come in and say, yes, they've done X percent of the project, helps you understand, okay, then I'm going to pay you for that amount of the project.
Which is the whole reason why banks have set up incremental paying to ensure the progress is being made.
Yes. And look, I've got banks as clients, and so I'm not going to bash banks at the moment, but I'm going to tell you that the inspectors that banks hire, just like, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, right?
Mm-hmm.
The city of San Antonio sends an inspector out to review the house. If they signed off on it, it must be okay.
Yeah.
Wrong. Okay. I mean, banks don't pay a lot to inspectors. I've represented inspectors before. They get paid very little money to go out there and look at that project. Inspectors for the state of San Antonio have a long list of projects they have to go look at. They are literally, spending very little time there and looking for certain things to make sure that they are done carefully. Having had to deal with residential construction disputes or commercial construction disputes, inspectors miss a lot. And if you don't have your own person out there who's got your back, you're going to miss stuff. And look, construction is a complicated process. There are lots of pieces to it, and they have to go in a certain order or they won't be done right. I mean, I can't tell how many times, I'm thinking of a case where the windows, the tabs, someone nailed through the tabs on the window. Well, that held the window in there, but it also blocked the channel so water couldn't escape from the window. You're not going to know about that for a long period of time, but unless you had an inspector that said, yeah, we're not going to improve that window, pull it out and start again. Once you cover it with the tar paper or whatever you call it these days, you're never going to see that window and how it was adhered to the wall. You're just going to know it's not going to fall out and not realize you've got a problem that's going to ticking time bomb on you.
And often in a circumstance like that, let's say it's we're in a drought right now. We've been in a drought, so we've not had the major rains. Mm-hmm. Let's say we get blessed with major rains, please. And it comes back and those windows leak and it's 5 years later. Mm-hmm. You've got contracts that have a warranty for a short amount of time.
Absolutely.
So how does that get handled then when somebody says, hey, The builder's not going to come back because the builder says, hey, you're out of my warranty. Don't care. That's always their first line of defense.
Absolutely.
And that consumer says, oh, no, you are going to care because it's every single window in my house. How does that get handled, James?
Through litigation, and it gets expensive. And the other part you missed of that is your homeowner's insurance, right? Some things are covered, some things are not covered. If it's an intentional defect, it may not be covered. And so you may be in a situation where the builder may be gone. The insurance company is saying, not our problem. And the homeowner is saying, wait a minute, I've got a $100,000 issue here. And so that's when you have to get aggressive and go after the right people and find a way to get coverage.
And, I say that's, I have sent clients to you in the past that have unfortunately had builders that haven't done well or just quit. Or some of the shoddiest work you ever seen in your life.
Absolutely.
And it's unfortunate because those clients don't understand there is limitations.
Yep.
And especially if you don't make sure they don't have insurance, there's nothing like getting money out of a dried up turnip.
Absolutely. And we haven't even gone into home inspectors where by law and by contract, every homeowner inspector's contract says the most damages they're responsible for is the amount you paid them. So if you paid the home inspector $1,000, that's all you get back no matter whether they caught the mistakes or not.
Well, I learned something new. I'm going to go back and read their contract now.
You should.
I will.
But it's why you need to have a good home inspector. And again, I'm amazed how many people are like, well, I took the cheapest. Yeah. You take the cheapest, you get what you pay for. And so look, a home inspection or having a builder inspector or whoever you're hiring to look over that person's shoulder, you should be paying them well. You want them out there making sure that they're going to catch the stuff you're not going to have time to do. That's why you have them there.
Absolutely. James, tell us a little bit about how it would be really good for someone to think about having an attorney that they have a relationship with and budget for that. As a business owner myself, I know that I use your firm. Your people are amazing.
Thank you.
And I wouldn't, when I have a legal thing or I'm not sure of something, then I know as a business owner, I need to have an attorney on my side. We all like to say my real estate agent, my insurance broker. Well, it is probably a really good thing to say my attorney. So address that for me, will you?
The image that comes to mind is we don't go to the doctor just when we all of a sudden have something going wrong, right? You don't go to the doctor because you go to the doctor every year. You go to the doctor for checkups because you want to know along the way, hey, things are going right. And a lawyer is no different. I have lots of clients that come in. I have one client, literally, lots of clients, but one client in particular I'm thinking of that literally wants to buy an hour of my time every quarter. And we just talk about what's going on in his business and allows me to say, hey, what are you doing about this? Have you thought of that? What are you doing? You know what? We talked about you were going to give me your handbook. You haven't. You talked to me. You told me you were going to develop this piece of property. Where is that? Where are you in that process? And it allows us to get ahead of the curve. And so when they come back and they say, hey, turns out I am going to go buy that business. Turns out I'm going to go develop that property. We've already got a plan in place. And so they already know where I'm going to fit in. That if they're going to get investors, they know how I want to structure it. So when they're out there talking to people, they already know. When they're talking to their bank about how they're going to get a loan, they know where that's going to fit in the process. And so by just having me involved, just like you go see the doctor, right? You know what the expectations are. You know your weight's too heavy. You know your blood pressure's too high. Who knows? Well, these are my issues, not yours. But we know all these issues and we can work on them. A business is no different. And look, one of the reasons I started the Rosenblatt Law Firm, and it's very intentional in how we grew, is I want to be that one stop. It's too confusing as a business owner to say, wait a minute, is that a real estate issue or a contract issue or should I go to a litigator? Our law firm has them all. And so the idea is if you call one of our lawyers, we'll be your point of contact. We may not be the ultimate lawyer who's going to handle your situation, but we're going to bring in the right specialist for what you need for that situation. But the nice thing is, although we bring in specialists, we already know what your business does. We know what your risk tolerance is. We know what you like to see in various things. And so we're going to make sure we shape the result the way you like it. It'll be specialized to what you want.
And I'll go back to why I think it's important to say that, I'm going to run this by my attorney. It's like having your insurance policy. You pay money to negate a problem in the future. Having a my attorney and just know that that's going to be in your budget is exactly the same thing for asset protection. And that's really what it's about. Instead of going, oh, well, I don't want to pay that, or I don't want to do this. Well, how important are your assets?
Look, the example I always give, I'll have a new broker call me and be like, okay, I've got this commercial lease. It's 50 pages, but we don't want to spend more than $1,000 to have it reviewed. Yeah. Right. And they're like, wait a minute, it's a 5-year lease. It's 60 months. You're spending $10,000 a month. So, I mean, what is that? $600,000 you're spending. And yet you're concerned about whether it's $1,000 or $5,000. Look, 30 years worth of experience. I can tell you problems with a commercial lease, and not one of them cost you less than $5,000 to fix. Right?
That's true. And you bring a very good point here. So let's talk about contracts for a minute. And I know we've talked about a lot of different types of contracts, and most people don't understand how important it is to have somebody that really understands law look at them, from a basic pool contract to your promulgated builder contracts are a little less problematic. But when you get into custom building, and the builder had a contract, which is always in the favor of a builder, or a construction contract, which is always in the favor of the construction.
Yep.
Or even like you helped us with when I did my first lease for 5 years and paid somebody way too much money to lease for 5 years. I cannot imagine how I would have been impacted had we not had you review that lease and get it changed, because there were definitely some things in there that were not in my favor and would have impacted me financially as well.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would take a little issue is you said a promulgated contract may be fine. Look, promulgated contracts are fair for everyone or fair for no one. And so, yes, in real estate, you use lots of promulgated contracts. And in certain circumstances, that makes sense, right? It's a residential, it's a 1-year lease. No one's spending a lot of money on it. I understand that. But if I'm a landowner and I'm trying to protect my $500,000 residence, why would I spend a little money to have a good contract that's actually going to protect me better than a promulgated contract?
Oh, agree with that.
Right. And so, but look, if all I do is simply look at that contract and say, here are what you need to know, it was worth it. I will tell you in 99.9% of the time, I've got changes. And there are usually changes will get approved. There are very few instances where I've submitted changes and the other side said, absolutely not. And I'll tell you, in most of those cases, it was a great chance to walk away. Because if that other party isn't willing to negotiate, think of what's going to happen after you either let them move in or you move into their space. They're going to be very, very difficult. So it's actually a great sort of honeymoon phase to see how amenable they are to working with you.
Right. That is very true. And I've always learned, no matter what in life, if it's a win-win, life is good.
Right.
And having that advice is how you get to a win-win instead of a win-lose.
Yes. If it's all about, right. If it's all about, I have to win in order for you to lose, that's probably not a contract you want to be in the middle.
No, exactly.
I like that you're describing what you do as having a positive return on investment, right? Whether it actually happens, right? Because it materializes the return on investment. You saw it, you saved something, you saw something, or because you avoided something. But I think I'm curious to hear more about how you can help people make sense of how it's a wise investment, right? Because again, the big idea for me is people need to have an attorney on their team as part of the team that they're building to accomplish success. And it's not a luxury anymore. And it has a return on investment. And sometimes it's because you don't get into trouble, and sometimes because you can find value from it. And I also love the idea that in many cases, it's 30 years worth of business experience, right? There's a lot of business coaches out there that don't have a quarter of that. So being able to talk to someone that understands that you're here to make money and is trying to help you and protect you is something very positive.
My favorite clients are the clients that walk in before they've done something, and I help them through that process. I mean, look, this is a story I've told many times, and it's a great client of mine. He came to me because he was buying into another owner's business, and the guy wanted him to buy in, and he was reluctant, and we designed it a certain way. And he let me do what we needed to do, but I don't know that he appreciated all the things I did for him until he was ready to walk away. And when he walked away and he got paid out a very large sum of money, it allowed him the money to go buy another business and really do what he loves. And so today he's a very successful engineer in town, but it was because of how we set him up in the beginning that allowed him to pivot to where he was. And so I view my job as being a business advisor. I mean, on our license, it says attorney and counselor of law. I relish the counselor part. I love being involved where I'm helping people figure out their vision, figuring out how they want to run their business, helping them successfully do it, and maybe selling it off or figuring how to transfer it to the next generation. But something where they get to look back, or we get to look back and say, wow, that was a good run. We did it together. I was helping and you were successful, and that's fun to watch.
You've mentioned how we set them up. Can you give us a little bit of detail on what it means when you say how we set them up? Like, what are some variables that you look at, or some alternatives that you look at that you say, let's go this way instead of that way for some reason? Just some detail.
Yeah. So, I mean, it can be anything from how much money they have themselves to invest, how much money they need to be successful. Is it all going into one entity? What kind of entity is important? Should it be an S Corp or a C Corp or an LLC or a partnership? Who are they going to business with? Are they by themselves? Are they with others? What's their end strategy? Do they want to sell it off? Do they want to leave it to their future generations? Knowing all those things allows us to help structure it correctly. And so in every situation, we ask all these questions and we get into the weeds on them in order to figure out what makes sense. How do they really want to leave their legacy in this business?
And I think the important thing to what you said, James, also is each one of those steps comes with a certain way something needs to be written, put in place, cataloged, clear down to wills, lots of things that we as an individual or a business owner, that's not our expertise. So having a trusted advisor that can understand that, give us the guidelines, ask the right questions, and then actually help us put those mapped out pieces in place is, again, priceless. Instead of thinking, oh, this cost me this. Your prime example of the person at the end that said, I couldn't have done this had we not done this, I am sure is glad for every bit of it that he paid for because he's seen the benefit at the end. We may think, oh, I don't want to pay that right now because we see it as a charge, instead of understanding that it's a process and a path, and there's right ways and wrong ways, and we want to do the right way so that we don't pay for all the wrong ways.
Absolutely, right? And real estate's a perfect example of that. How many times have you seen people, I mean, look, personal houses, right? You buy your first house, it's probably not your final house. But if you haven't made a good investment, you won't be able to flip it into your next house, or you won't be able to keep it as a rent house and go buy the next house. I mean, real estate is by definition that. But if you have a step back, if you didn't do something right, you can't sell that house. You've got to tear it down, or it's hard to recover from that.
Yes.
And so, in real estate today, hundreds of thousands of dollars is easy. Millions of dollars is unfortunately not difficult anymore. And all it takes is one bad step, and it's hard to recover.
You aren't kidding. Yeah.
Right? And when you say, I don't want to spend $5,000 on a lawyer, but you're willing to go buy $1 million piece of property, right? I mean, think of, again, it's all about the team. You want a good broker, and you're going to pay them a commission because they did their job, and you want to pay them fairly. You bring in a lawyer, you bring in a banker, you bring in an insurance person, you may bring in a CPA. You want that team behind you that's looking for the things you don't know. And you're an expert in what you do. You need those people that are expert in what they do.
And I think that's a beautiful statement. It takes a team to really function well, and each person adds their part to it to make sure that it does have a happy ending with the least amount of hiccups. I know earlier you said that your wife was a litigator for a while. We hadn't talked about this yet, but you're like I am, husband and wife, work together. It's a key word, together.
And look, it is amazing. I don't mean to cut you off, but so my wife was a prosecutor. She's still a litigator.
Thank you.
We went to law. We met in law school.
Yes.
We agreed we would get married and never practice law together. We have now finished 5 years together, as she joined the firm 5 years ago.
Yes.
And it's been great. But she's a litigator. She thinks of the world as a nail, and she is the hammer. I see the world a little bit differently, but it allows us to work together and really add strength. And so it's been good.
I'm glad to hear that. She's an amazing person too. So
I am very lucky. We've been married for 30-something years, 32
Yes.
years. And so it just continues to get better.
So James, you have your wife that works with you as well, and then you have a lot of other attorneys that work with you, and you're growing. So tell us the awesome things that are happening at Rosenblatt Law Firm and some of the connection with the people there.
I think back to when I started the firm 20 years ago in the back office of another lawyer's firm, and my vision was not where I am today. Let's be clear. That would have been wild. It was wild. But the principles I started the firm on are the principles we still live by. And we still believe in when a client comes in, we are there to solve a problem. And whether it's a litigation problem or a estate planning problem or a probate problem or a contract problem or a real estate problem, we're there to solve a problem. We're also there to be there tomorrow when the next problem comes up or when the problem needs to be fixed or something else goes on. And, I tell my attorneys, I tell all my staff, we answer phone calls, right? What do people hate about lawyers? I called them and they didn't answer. No one calls a lawyer because they want to chat. They call the lawyer because they got a problem. And if we're not there being responsive, you may not get a hold of me. I may not be available, but someone in my office is going to return that phone call and find out how we can help you and put someone on the phone who can solve that problem. And that's what I believe in. I want people who own businesses, who are involved in legal issues, to think of, hey, if I call Rosenblatt, I will get someone there who can solve my problem. And that's what we do today. The nice thing is it's not just me anymore. And so I've got a litigation group. I've got an estate planning group. I've got an employment attorney. I've got I've got many real estate attorneys. I've got people who deal with privacy issues and HIPAA issues and medical issues. I've got attorneys that have experience in what a client needs. But also, because we do things together, you may call for a medical issue. You own a medical office or you've got a HIPAA issue. But we're also going to look at it from a contract perspective and a litigation perspective and other areas because that's what we bring to the table. We bring a team approach internally also because we want to make sure when we're looking at something, we're looking at it to get the best result for you. And that typically is not just one person thinking about it themselves. It's a group getting together and saying, hey, wait a minute, I've got this piece of experience. I've got this piece of experience. How do I look at this situation with those ideas in mind?
Well, and I'm just going to take that a step further. You guys are personable too. Not all law firms are. I will vouch for the fact that I've never not had a return email or phone call, and not all law firms can say that. And you guys also do a lot of things for the community. You're very involved, and I think you truly love the communities you're in, and so forth. So tell us a little bit about that.
It's funny, and the reason I'm smiling is we've added this Houston office, and so as I tell business owners all the time, the first largest challenge you will ever have in your business is when you try to add a second office. And we are going through all that ourselves. But it's a great experience because it also means that I've got to explain what's important about Rosenblatt Law Firm and how in Houston we're going to do what's important for us. And so getting back to the community, we just had our rally. We just brought everyone together. We talked about these things. We are part of the community. We've been fortunate. We've been successful. But if we don't give back, if we don't share our knowledge, we're not doing our job. And so for us, doing our job means we do pro bono work, we give back, we're involved. And I tell every one of my lawyers, I tell every one of my staff, tell us what you love, whether it's helping animals, whether it's being involved in social issues, whether it's being involved in your church. I don't care what it is. Get involved, do something you love, and make sure we can figure out a way to help participate. And so we've been fortunate enough to do that.
Are there a few things you'd like to point out that you guys have done or contributed to or are part of?
It's a very long list.
It is.
Just a few too.
I'm trying to think of where it's not just me. My wife belongs to Impact San Antonio. I'm involved in BioBridge, which we all know is the South Texas Blood Bank. We have people involved in the SAM shelter. We have people involved in Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the food bank. As I said, you name it, we've got people who are interested in that. And that's part of being who they are and sharing.
That's awesome. So James, if I want to hire an attorney with your firm, how do I get a hold of you?
You call 210-562-2900 or you go online to www.rosenblatt, ROSENBLATT, lawfirm.com. And we will set you to call them and tell them you're looking to be a new client, and they will ask you some questions and get you set up with the right attorney.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.